The camera caught everything. But no one's seen it yet. It started like an ordinary evening. Quiet streets, dim lights, and a stillness in the air that made everything feel almost too calm. But sometimes, the most shocking stories don't come with loud warnings or obvious signs. They unfold in silence, waiting for someone to notice. And in this case, it wasn't a person who noticed first. It was a camera. A simple recording device, placed there to capture routine moments, ended up catching something no one was ever supposed to see. When you think about cameras, you imagine them storing memories, proof, or maybe just background noise of daily life. But what happens when that camera becomes the only witness to something hidden, something strange, unsettling, and yet undeniably real? The footage was there frame by frame, untouched and unseen. Hours of recording, stored quietly, like a secret waiting to be revealed. And yet, even now, almost no one has laid eyes on it. The story you're about to hear is not built on rumors or exaggerated tales. It's about real people, ordinary lives crossing paths in an extraordinary way. It's about how technology, often overlooked, can sometimes capture truths too raw, too unexpected, and too powerful to ignore. The people involved never imagined they would be part of something like this.
To them, it was just another day.
But the lens doesn't lie, and what it captured has left questions no one can fully answer. Why hasn't anyone seen it yet? What's in that footage that keeps it locked away from curious eyes? And most importantly, what happens when it finally comes out? Stay with me, because what's hidden in that recording will change the way you think about being watched, about secrets, and about the stories that cameras never meant to tell. The strange thing about the story is how normal everything seemed at first. The house where the camera was placed wasn't abandoned or haunted, and the people living there weren't expecting anything unusual. It belonged to a small family, a couple and their teenage son, who had set up the camera for practical reasons. They wanted a sense of safety, just like anyone else would. The neighborhood was calm most of the time, but there had been whispers of petty theft, odd noises at night, and small things going missing. Nothing serious, nothing that would make headlines. Just enough for them to think, why not keep an eye on things? So, the camera was installed quietly in a corner, almost forgotten about after a few days. It became just another piece of technology blending into the background. But that's where the story begins to twist. Because while the family carried on with their daily lives, school, work, and the usual routines, the camera was watching. And it was recording moments that seemed harmless until they were looked at more closely. The father didn't mention much about it, but he sometimes had a strange feeling that someone had been in the yard at night. The mother dismissed it as nerves, pointing out how shadows and streetlights can play tricks on the eyes. Their son thought it was just paranoia. But when they finally sat down to review some of the recordings, they realized there were small details they couldn't explain. The angle of a chair changing slightly, a door that looked a little more open than before, faint sounds in the audio that didn't belong to them. At first, they brushed it off. Maybe it was just wind. Maybe they had forgotten moving something. But the unease started to grow. Every time they returned to the footage, there was another subtle change, another hint that the camera was catching more than just an empty living room or a quiet backyard. And yet, they didn't tell anyone. They kept it to themselves, unsure of what they were really looking at. The recordings piled up, untouched, sitting on the hard drive. Each file was labeled neatly by date and time, like any normal archive. But inside those files were hours of unanswered questions. Why did certain objects seem to shift when no one was around? Why were there moments where the audio picked up faint movements, even though everyone in the house had been asleep? The strangest part is this. No one outside the family has ever watched the full footage. It remains hidden, sitting in storage, like a secret waiting for someone brave enough to press play. And the question that lingers is, what exactly will they see when they do? The more time passed, the harder it became for the family to ignore what the recordings showed. Every small detail felt like part of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. One night, the father stayed up late, replaying the footage in slow motion. That's when he noticed something that made his chest tighten. At exactly 2:13 a.m., a shadow seemed to move across the frame. It wasn't the flicker of headlights from a passing car or the stretch of a tree branch swaying in the wind. This shadow moved with purpose, as if it belonged to someone, even though no one was there. He didn't mention it to his wife right away. Maybe because he didn't want to scare her, or maybe because he wasn't ready to admit what he'd seen. But his behavior started to change. He checked the locks more often, peeked out the windows at night, and sometimes stood in the living room long after everyone else had gone to bed. His wife noticed, of course, and eventually she asked if something was wrong. He hesitated, then finally showed her the clip. She watched silently, replaying the same few seconds over and over. Her first reaction was denial. It must be a glitch. Maybe the camera lens is dirty. But as she leaned closer, she saw what he had seen. The shadow wasn't random. It had shape. It had movement. And if you looked closely enough, it seemed to pause, almost as if it knew it was being recorded. Meanwhile, their son, curious about the growing tension in the house, decided to explore the footage on his own. What he found wasn't just the shadow. He noticed patterns the others had missed, faint noises that always happened at the same hour, small shifts in the background that seemed too deliberate to be accidents. He began keeping notes, marking down times and details, convinced that the recordings were telling a story, even if none of them understood it yet. The conflict wasn't just about what the camera had caught. It was also inside the family. The father wanted to keep everything quiet, afraid of what outsiders might say. The mother felt torn between fear and reason, unsure if she should believe her own eyes. And the son, restless and curious, wanted answers, no matter how unsettling they might be. Each of them carried their own version of the truth, but the footage remained the same, unchanging, waiting. The mystery wasn't just in what they had seen, but in what they hadn't dared to look at yet. Because buried in those hours of recordings, there was something none of them were prepared for. Nights in the house began to feel different. Even though everything looked the same on the surface, the same quiet neighborhood, the same gentle hum of the refrigerator, the same ticking of the clock, there was a heaviness none of them could shake. It wasn't just about the camera anymore. It was about the way the camera had made them notice things they might have otherwise ignored. Every sound in the hallway felt sharper. Every flicker of light made them pause. And no matter how hard they tried to carry on, the thought of that footage pulled at them like a weight. The father grew more restless. He checked the files over and over, as if searching for some logical explanation that would make everything vanish. But the more he looked, the stranger the recordings became. Sometimes at odd hours, the footage seemed to blur slightly, as if the lens itself was resisting. At other times, the audio picked up faint, low tones like a breath or a whisper that didn't belong to anyone in the house. He started keeping a notebook, scribbling down times and notes, but the entries only made him more anxious. The mother found herself caught between disbelief and fear. By day, she told herself it was all in their heads, that they were giving too much power to a set of recordings. But at night, when she walked through the living room alone, she couldn't help glancing toward the corner where the camera stood. It felt less like a device and more like an eye, one that never closed, one that knew more than it should. She sometimes thought about unplugging it altogether, ending the unease, but she never could bring herself to do it. Because deep down, she wanted to know too. Their son, meanwhile, became obsessed. He spent hours replaying moments, adjusting the brightness, listening with headphones turned all the way up. He discovered small patterns no one else had noticed. On certain nights, the shadow appeared not once, but twice. First moving across the floor, then disappearing near the back door. On other nights, there was a sound, almost like footsteps, followed by silence. He shared his findings with his parents, but instead of bringing them together, it only deepened the cracks between them. His father told him to stop digging, to let it go. His mother begged him to be careful, to not let it consume him. But he couldn't let it go. And then came the night when everything changed. It was past midnight, the house quiet, the family asleep, except for the son. He had stayed up again, scrolling through footage, determined to catch something in real time. At 2:13 a.m., the same minute he'd marked so many times before, he froze. On the screen, the shadow appeared, sharper than ever. But this time, It didn't just pass across the frame. It lingered. It hovered in the middle of the room, darker and clearer than before, almost taking form. His heart pounded as he leaned closer, afraid to blink. And then, something happened that none of them had seen in all the hours of recordings. The shadow seemed to turn, as though aware of the camera. It didn't vanish quickly like before. It paused, stretched, and tilted, almost as if it was looking directly at him through the screen. For a split second, he swore he could feel it staring back, like the barrier between the footage and the living room wasn't as solid as he'd believed. He gasped loudly enough to wake his parents, who rushed into the room. By the time they looked, the footage had returned to normal, just the quiet living room on the screen, nothing moving, nothing strange. But the boy's face was pale, his hands shaking. He couldn't find the words to explain what he had seen, what he had felt. All he could do was point at the timestamp, his finger trembling. The father and mother exchanged a look, the kind that carried both fear and doubt. They rewound the footage, searching desperately for the moment he had described. And though the image was faint, almost easy to dismiss, they both saw enough to know this wasn't their imagination anymore. Something was there. Something had been watching. And that's when the unease in the house turned into something heavier, something they couldn't ignore. Because if the camera had caught this much, what else had it recorded that they hadn't dared to watch yet? The silence after that night was louder than anything. The family avoided talking about the footage, each of them secretly replaying the moment in their heads, trying to decide if what they saw was real. But the son couldn't stop thinking about it. He felt certain that the shadow hadn't just been moving aimlessly, it had been aware, almost intentional. And what unsettled him the most wasn't what was on the video, but the strange feeling he'd had in the moment itself. It was as if the camera wasn't just recording, it was somehow connected to them. Days later, when he came home from school, he noticed something odd. One of the files on the hard drive had changed. It was a clip he hadn't opened before, dated weeks earlier. But now the timestamp was different, as though it had been altered. Curious, he clicked play. The footage started normally, the empty living room, the quiet night. But a few seconds in, his breath caught. In the reflection of a picture frame hanging on the wall, he could see something that wasn't visible in the main shot. It wasn't just a shadow this time. It was a faint outline of a figure standing near the corner, perfectly still, almost blending into the darkness. When he showed his parents, the reaction was explosive. His father snapped, insisting it was impossible, that the video must be corrupted. His mother covered her mouth with her hand, whispering that she remembered feeling uneasy that very night, as if someone had been in the house while they slept. Suddenly, the conflict wasn't only about the footage, it was about their trust in one another. Was the father hiding something? Was the son pushing too far? Was the mother starting to see patterns that weren't there? The tension in the family grew heavier with each unanswered question. But then came the twist that changed everything. One evening, while the father was reviewing the camera files alone, he stumbled upon something he couldn't explain. It wasn't a recording of the house. It was a clip that showed him sitting at the table flipping through his notebook exactly as he was in that moment. He blinked, frozen. The footage wasn't from the past. It was showing him live. The camera wasn't just recording anymore. It was predicting. Shaken, he yanked the plug from the wall, the screen going black. But when he looked back at the files, the clip was still there, saved with a timestamp from minutes earlier. He didn't tell his wife and son right away, too afraid of what it might mean. But keeping that secret only pushed them further apart. His son noticed his anxious behavior. His mother caught him staring at the blank screen as though it might turn on by itself. Finally, late one night, the truth came out. He confessed what he had seen, the footage that seemed to watch him in real time. His wife's face drained of color, and his son's eyes widened with something that was half fear, half excitement. If the recordings could show things that hadn't happened yet, then the stakes were no longer just about shadows or noises. The camera wasn't only a witness. It was something else entirely. And then came the final blow. As they argued over what to do, a new file appeared on the hard drive without anyone touching it. The date on the folder wasn't from the past or the present. It was stamped with tomorrow's date. None of them dared to open it. Not yet. But the file sat there, waiting, pulsing like a warning none of them could ignore. The family sat in silence, staring at the new file on the hard drive. None of them wanted to be the first to open it, but they all knew they couldn't leave it untouched. Finally, the son reached out with trembling hands and clicked play. The screen flickered, and there it was, their living room, exactly as it looked in that moment. Except this time, they were all in it. The mother, the father, the son sitting on the couch, just as they were right now. But in the recording, something else was there too. Standing behind them was the shadow, darker, taller, and unmistakably present. For a moment, no one breathed. The father leaned forward, whispering that it was impossible, just some kind of trick. But then the shadow in the footage moved. Slowly, it raised what looked like an arm and placed it on the father's shoulder, right in the video, right in front of their eyes. And almost instantly, the father felt a cold pressure on his own shoulder in real life. He jolted upright, spinning around, but there was nothing behind him. Nothing they could see, anyway. Panic spread through the room. The mother cried out. The son grabbed at the keyboard, desperately trying to stop the recording, but the video wouldn't close. It kept playing, showing them sitting there, reacting just as they were, trapped in a loop that seemed to know every move they made. It was as if the camera had stopped being a device and become a mirror of something deeper, something watching them from both sides of the screen. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the video froze. The final frame showed the three of them sitting on the couch, but this time, the shadow was gone. The room on the screen was empty, quiet, safe. They looked around, half expecting something to happen, but the house was still. The hard drive clicked softly, and the file vanished before their eyes, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. Breathing heavily, they realized the recordings had stopped. The camera no longer worked. Whatever had been haunting them or watching them seemed to have ended with that final file. For the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet again. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, as the son got ready for school, he pulled out his phone to check the time. At the top of his gallery, a new video had appeared. It wasn't from the camera. It was from his phone's front camera. The thumbnail showed his own face, staring wide-eyed into the lens, with a dark figure standing just behind him. The son froze when he saw the video on his phone. His parents rushed over, and together they watched the short clip in silence. It showed him sitting at the desk, almost as if the phone had been recording without his knowledge. At first it seemed harmless, just a still image of his face, but then the frame shifted. The dark figure appeared again, standing close enough that it looked as though it could reach out and touch him. And then, just like before, the video ended abruptly, leaving behind only questions. This was different from the camera. The family hadn't set anything up this time. There was no lens watching the house, no device they could unplug. If the shadow had moved from the camera to his phone, what did that mean? Was it following them now? Or was it simply showing them something they weren't meant to understand? For the first time, the family stopped trying to analyze it. They didn't rewind, they didn't look for patterns, and they didn't argue. Instead, they made a decision to put it to rest. The father deleted the file, without hesitation. The son wanted to save it, to study it later, but his mother placed her hand gently over his and shook her head. "Some things," she whispered, "are not meant to be replayed." And for the first time, he understood. The camera had drawn them in, pulled them apart with fear and doubt, but it had also forced them to see something bigger, that not every question has an answer, and not every mystery should be solved. From that night forward, they stopped checking recordings. The father unplugged every device. The mother opened the curtains each morning, letting light flood into the house. The son found himself spending more time outside, with real people, instead of staring into screens. And slowly, the house began to feel like a home again. The heaviness lifted. The silence no longer carried fear. Yet, the experience left them changed. They knew the shadow had been real, whether as a presence or as a reflection of something deeper. It had been caught on camera, stored in files, and even slipped into their phones. But what mattered wasn't figuring out where it came from. What mattered was choosing not to let it control them anymore. The story ends not with answers, but with perspective. Cameras can capture moments no one expects, but Sometimes the power lies not in watching, but in knowing when to look away. And though the family never saw the shadow again, they carried the memory of it as a reminder. Some things are meant to remain unseen.